Hey, welcome to BACKtalk, the premier podcast from successful Black Parenting magazine, featuring in-depth conversations and expert insights on crucial topics for the Black family. We're ranked one of the top 4 Black family podcasts on FeedSpot. I'm your host, Janice Robinson-Celeste. I also want to tell you about our Black Parenting Academy. We're launching it on April 7th. We have some amazing masterclasses for Black parents. So go to blackparentingacademy.com right now to get on the waiting list. Now back to our show. What if something as natural as breastfeeding could determine your baby's chances of a healthy start, but access to it wasn't equal for everyone? On today's show, I have a lactation specialist and even more. He does a lot of different things with lactation, but I'll tell you more in a little bit, so stay tuned.
This is BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the most listened to podcast for parents by parents.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, your go-to podcast talk show for parents. Now, I need a little favor from all of you listeners out there. Just go ahead and spread the word about our show. The more you engage, the more we all can thrive. We are live, which means you can post questions under this video and we'll answer your questions live on air, but do it early. Tell your friends, shout it out to your followers because sharing is truly caring. And don't forget, use our hashtag BACKtalk when you post about us. Now, on this episode of BACKtalk, our special guest is Dr. Clifton Keenan Jr. Welcome to the show, Dr. Keenan.
I feel very welcome, and I'm glad to be here, and greetings in this last few days of March 2025, a year that will forever be remembered.
Absolutely. You said it. You said it without saying it. I appreciate that too. But that's to start. You are amazing with your credentials. Can you tell our audience a bit about yourself and the work you do in lactation consulting and advocacy?
Absolutely. So my name is Clifton Keenan. I am a rural American from southeastern North Carolina, and I grew up in a community that was illuminated by a caution light, which later became an actual full stoplight. Educated at a historically Black university, Winston-Salem State, as well as my parents and all of my siblings were all HBCU educated. And I studied nursing. I've wanted to be a nurse since I was in the 3rd grade. I told my 3rd grade teacher, who ironically also went to Winston-Salem State, that I wanted to be a nurse. And she said, "Become a nurse, you shall." I finished nursing school when I was 19 years old, and I have been working with families and communities around lactation since I was 19 years old. And that's been near 2 decades. Have had the opportunity to work on lactation issues in all 50 states, all 5 territories, and across 6 of the 7 continents. There hasn't been lactation work to do in Antarctica, but if there is, I will be going there also. And every day I'm inspired around and with communities who are empowering women, empowering families to make healthy choices through breastfeeding and human lactation. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about today.
Now, that's fantastic. Now, that's your public persona. But before we dive in, I have an icebreaker for you. Okay, you ready?
All right, I think so.
Okay, what's one fun or surprising fact about you that most people don't know?
Well, other than being a Southern African-American man who specializes in breastfeeding, now that everyone knows that, I am a competitive flower gardener. I grow, raise, and hybridize award-winning dahlias.
Wow.
And I breed and show internationally Lhasa Apsos. So I have a show dog kennel, and I raise competitive flowers that we compete all over the country with.
I want the dogs and the flowers. Okay.
All right. Well, we
Yeah.
can talk about that too. We can talk about puppies, breastfeeding, and flowers
Little
because they
puppies,
can be mutually inclusive.
little puppies, little doggies. I love it. I have a Maltese. So yes. All right. No, it's fantastic. I love that about you. And I love to garden, but I like to grow my own food. That's the only difference. I like being independent. If I want a salad, I can go pick it, That's
I
kind of
love vegetables, but living in South Central Pennsylvania, there's farm stands on every corner, and every inch of dirt here has a dahlia in it.
I bet. I bet. All right. So why is breastfeeding such a critical health issue, especially in the Black community?
So let's talk about that. So breastfeeding is a critical issue in every community, in every society. The way you nourish your children, it has profound impact in the trajectory of the rest of their life. Health disparities begin at birth. And one of the greatest health equalizers is starting off our children with the most optimal nutrition possible. And the most optimal nutrition is breast milk and milk from humans. This has been a staple in societies, and particularly in the Black community, for hundreds of years. And it's been in recent times that we've had to regain some of these cultural practices. But they're part and parcel with disease prevention. They're part and parcel with economic stability. They're part and parcel with healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy and benefits for mom and baby. I talk a lot about community self-determination and ways in which rural and urban communities, but particularly Black rural and urban communities, can really work to have sustainable investments in their community. And that starts with investing in the health and wellness of our children. I don't need to go into depth, but I think we all universally can accept that breastfeeding is the optimal healthy way to feed children. So theoretically, most people want to breastfeed. About over 80% of families in America initiate breastfeeding. But when we talk about how people are able to sustain that, how they are supported, and the things that come along with that journey, like in many other things, Black families are disproportionately impacted by resources, services, access to skilled care, and a variety of other things that really inhibit the ability for communities to fully maximize those investments. So those are some of the things we can dig into more.
Yeah, because data shows that only 73% of Black newborns are ever breastfed. So that number is lower compared to other groups. And you said all those things are like keeping Black moms from doing that, right? Or what? I mean, so what is the real deal here, and what can we do to fix it?
So first, these things are being fixed. So that number is not where we want it to be, but it's not where it's been. So first off, shout out to the Black birthing community and the birthing professionals, as well as families, grandparents, communities that have really invested into lactation and breastfeeding, because we've seen this number rise. When I started off in lactation, the number was much lower. The initiation rates were lower, the sustainability, duration, and so forth. But over the last 20 years, we've seen a good increase. But as you said, when we look at the proportion in relation to African Americans and our Black population in comparison to, say, whites and Asians, that number does keep lagging behind. But when we also look at other disparities, things like infant mortality and some of the health disparities that impact Black communities, they also are disproportionate in comparison to white and Asian families. So those things do go hand in hand. So where do we get started? I want everyone that's listening today to think about, what your first impression is of breastfeeding. Because if your first impression of breastfeeding is something that, you need to cover up, it needs to not be done in public, it makes me uncomfortable. If those are some of the things that come to mind, and they do in some communities, that's really where we have got to start with dissecting the problem and empowering people around the normalization that feeding your children, feeding our children in the same way that other mammalian species are fed with their parents' milk is the only normal way. I think if we can normalize that, we can begin to dig into what it looks like to support, what it looks like to empower, and what it looks like to advocate as a community.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I breastfed my children, so I know that I felt totally comfortable, but other people just didn't feel comfortable. I remember covering her up, getting strange looks, just with a like receiving blanket kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Of course, you had the specialty bras that just go plop, so that always helps, But it was more other people that had a problem with it. And I'm like, a lot of people sexualize it that don't know better, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I am feeding my baby. Would a cow feeding from its mom be considered sexual? It's like that always bothered me. And then just the looks that people will often give you. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, the thing that gets me is that way back when, I'm going back to slavery, okay, we were like the experts. We nursed the master's baby.
We nursed our people nursed society.
Yes.
That's just the facts.
So how did we go from that to 73%?
So how do we go from that? So how do we go from, how do we go from other things that sustain communities like, education and supporting each other? A lot of things have impacted African-American and Black communities' ability to self-determine, whether it's gentrification, whether it's racism, the intersections of all of these things, marginalization, where people are able to live, work, and play. All of those things collectively come together and result in disparity. So when we think about how Black communities were thriving throughout different parts of history, those thriving communities were thriving because they had self-determination and empowerment. So when we have communities today where, people are struggling with knowing if their water is going to be clean, if they have lead in their homes, if they have access to buying food at a grocery store, if you live in a grocery desert, if you have the ability to access a health facility or skilled healthcare workers, all of those things can be part and parcel to where you live. There are some states where to access maternal health services, it could be up to 2 hours drive each way to access even some of these services. So when we think about communities' ability to thrive, there are a lot of other intersections. And when we look at where Black communities have come through time and through history, if we think about wet nursing and why maybe for a generation or two, people wanted to wash their hands of breastfeeding because it looked like indentured servitude. It looked like forms of slavery. If we think about the sensationalism of infant formula that was pushed on our people without informed consent, without adequate information, the sexiness and the modernization of using formula over breast milk, people were led to believe that at times was superior. So we are trying to regain all of those things culturally, societally. We're trying to regain them in ways that centers Blackness and centers us celebrating our ability to nourish our families and our communities in the same way that society depended on our nourishment for all those years. It's our time.
Right. And we know that we've had some inconsistent information coming from the medical field. So how does this historical trauma and medical mistrust affect, especially medical mistrust? It's kind of touched on the historical trauma, but how does that affect breastfeeding rates among Black moms?
Well, first of all, I just want to say it's valid. And unfortunately, it still exists, and for many Black families, for many Black women, this manifests through people not fully believing them when they access medical care. national maternal mortality and morbidity is completely out of control, completely inconsistent with our developed and civilized society. And a lot of these things stem back to people not being believed. Things such as structural racism that exist within the health systems, and the things that allow you to access the health system, because you still got to get to the health system. So whether you need to access it by a bus or so forth. And then when you get there, if you feel as though you're being judged, if what you're saying is your experience is not being believed or being belittled, all of those things play a role into why people are hesitant to fully trust and partner with health communities, which in turn should require that health organizations and healthcare workers be that much more intentional with partnering and being transparent with people, because we have well-documented instances throughout history where that trust has been broken and it hasn't been fully regained because it hasn't been fully earned.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Now, is that number 73%? Is that going up or are we going down?
So breastfeeding initiation rates as a whole are going up. Where we continue to see challenges is, okay, so as those numbers go up, they are still lagging behind other aggregates. They're still lagging behind other demographics. So, you know, as the minimum wage goes up, if everything else goes up at the same time, we're still not getting to equity. However, that is not to minimize progress, nor is it to take away the applause of tremendous work that is being done in Black communities around breastfeeding, because that truly does deserve an applause.
Oh, absolutely. Now, in your experience, how does access to culturally competent lactation support impact breastfeeding outcomes?
How does access to culturally complementary and culturally humble care access any outcome, right? People are able to thrive when they're able to bring their authentic self, right? You know, as a rural American, I have a special connection with a lot of my patients who are rural Americans. You know, I understand what it's like that when your water is coming from a well. I understand what it's like, you know, when the pump breaks and some of these things, and lived experiences that are commensurate and complementary with those in the populations that you're serving goes a long ways. You know, I know what it's like, you know, when a family talks about, you know, living in a town where, you know, they don't have access to a Whole Foods, or, you know, people talk about fruits that you can get in cities that you can't get in certain areas. And I think that creates a level of comfort, but that's not always necessary. So when you don't have similar lived experiences, or you may not be from that community, I think this is where humility comes in. And this is where the rubber meets the road with partnership, right? So when I'm seeing, you know, a client or working with a family of which, you know, I'm not well versed in the culture and they've invited me in, I'm there to partner and learn, and we're there to work on those things together, because I don't have all of the answers, and I want to center their lived experiences. So I think culturally appropriate care is fundamental. I think communities have a responsibility to invest in creating these things where they see gaps. So, you know, every time I see a young or a mid-career or someone that's looking for something to do impactful, I ask them, have you ever thought about doing lactation? Have you ever thought about being a community health worker? Have you ever thought about how you could support families? Lactation is one of those ways. And over the last 15 years, the Black and brown breastfeeding community has invested beyond what's imaginable in creating lactation providers that look like the communities they're serving. My first 10 years of doing lactation, I knew 3 other African-American lactation professionals. Today, I go to conferences and there are entire rooms, like big rooms, full of people that look like me. Yes. That's the progress that needs to be celebrated.
Yes, it does indeed. Now, you mentioned showing up as your authentic self. So, you also work with the LGBT community. So, can you talk about that a little bit and tell us, what you do and what the work is?
Absolutely. So I work with every community because every person that is on a lactation journey, you have a space in my practice. So one of the things that I've prided myself in working with families and over the years is induced lactation. And in the LGBT community, I work with families who are inducing lactation. And in some cases, for example, in the cases where we have two moms, I've worked with them to induce lactation, and both moms have had the opportunity to breastfeed their child and or children, because it does work with multiples also, but also working with non-binary individuals who may be using human milk and using supplemental nursing systems and really want to feed at the chest and all of those things. And I'll say, when it comes to breastfeeding, chest feeding, lactation, this is all encompassing. So across the entire Black diaspora, whether you are binary, non-binary, whether you're in traditional, non-traditional, all of those things still have, all of those identities have a place in lactation. And my practice is all encompassing. So it's not just mom and dad. It could be mom and dad. It could be mom and mom. It could be dad who is doing chest feeding. It could be two dads. It could be adoptive parents who are doing induced lactation. It could be supporting families who want to use human milk and being able to procure that from a human milk bank to feed their child with human milk. All of those things, lactation providers and the broader birthing community is prepared to support you with.
You know what? That is not my area of expertise, so I find it very interesting. And if you ever want to pen an article for our publication, I think that's where we're lacking. Like, we could definitely use information on chest feeding. Like, I didn't even know it was called that. So you educated me today. So that's very interesting. So if you ever want to pen an article, let me know. We got you. We'll make sure
that sounds fun.
Featured as well, because I find it like totally interesting. So what is it that a cis person that like me that are probably listening? So, we have a wide variety of audience members. What is it that we might not know, like that you could educate us about? You just taught us about chest feeding. So what else is there that we don't know?
So, where do we start, right? So I know a lot of faith-based organizations and so forth. My partner is in the ministry. So we do a lot of stuff in faith-based communities, but where we start is fundamentally breastfeeding and the use of human milk is the optimal way to feed our children, to feed our society, right? And supporting families to breastfeed and use human milk, whether you know anything else, just knowing how important that is gives you a way, if you see a mom breastfeeding on a park bench, to walk by and do this or say, have a great day, you're doing awesome. Those are micro affirmations that every single person can do. But in a broader community, I think it's important for people to understand there are additional things you can do. And one of those things is we need to create baby-friendly spaces. There's too much sexiness around having events where people can't bring their breastfeeding infants, right? So if you're planning a wedding, or if you're planning, a game night, I think it's cool if, parents need a break from their kids. Like, I don't have any judgment on that, because I need a break from mine at times. But I think we have got to preserve any space that we create to be a breastfeeding friendly space. So if that means if you're having a game night and your friends come, you make it extra special. If you are breastfeeding, you can bring your kid. If you need to use the breast pump or do hand expression, I'm going to have an area where you can do that, and we're going to celebrate you. Those are things that everyone can do. Now, in our traditional cis communities, in our faith communities, academic events, sports events, and so forth, I talk a lot to other Black men around what it looks like to normalize breastfeeding. So if someone comes and sits beside you and they start breastfeeding, often men will say, well, what am I supposed to do? You do exactly what you were doing before they came and sat down, void of you acknowledge that they are there. And all of these things go into normalizing breastfeeding, right? I tell godparents, when moms are choosing, when families are choosing godparents and uncles and so forth, there are basic 15-minute videos, podcasts, just like yours. Have everyone around you listen to a micro learning about why breastfeeding is normal. And maybe you say, these are things that I believe would be useful in our family to support breastfeeding, and really being able to center that. So if you go to a family event, anybody that comes to any events I have, people are going to be breastfeeding because they are all marketed as breastfeeding friendly events. If you have a wedding, if I have a cookout, if I have a garden party, if I have a happy hour, anytime I invite people, there's always a little note that says, this is a breastfeeding, lactation friendly space. So everyone that's coming is put on notice. If you are uncomfortable with people breastfeeding, I would prefer that you not come, not the people that actually are breastfeeding. I'll tell you a quick story.
Okay.
So I was at an event. It was a wedding, and everyone was eating at the buffet, and a mom was breastfeeding her child. And, a guy says, I think people would be more comfortable, if you covered up. And I responded and I said, okay, well, I think that's a great idea. Let me see if I can find a blanket. So she gave me a receiving blanket and I put it on his head. And I said, why don't you try eating with something over your head, since you expect other people to normalize feeding their children? Do you feed your children with things over their head? Why are you expecting other people to do that? So since you're the person that's uncomfortable, we're going to cover your head up so you don't have to see it. And that stimulated a conversation that people's discomfort with people doing what is best for their own families is really something they got to start taking up with their therapist.
Yes, absolutely. And too many people want to control other people and what they're doing. Not that in this world, like you need to mind your business. And so more people stayed minding their own business versus everyone else's, the world will be a better place, And
breastfeeding is protected in every part of the United States, in public areas and in areas where you are invited. So in thinking about what those protections look like, when you start bothering people or making them feel uncomfortable, that becomes a form of harassment and could even potentially be sexual harassment. But I don't want to weaponize this in our Black communities. I want people to be empowered, and I want where people are uncomfortable because maybe they're from a generation where people didn't do that. We work together to build normalcy. And I think the way we build that is by continually creating opportunities for people to reimagine what normal is.
Right. And, when my children were at the nursing age, it really wasn't normalized. And I can remember just as plain as day riding the L train in Philadelphia and my baby screaming because she's hungry. And I was just like, screw it. Pulled out and nursed on the train. All kinds of looks, right?
Good for you, because everybody else that's on the train that gets hungry, they pull out a snack. I know when I'm on long distance commuter trains and I get hungry, I pull a snack out and I eat it. I don't go in the bathroom. I don't find something to cover myself up because other people may be bothered that I'm eating in a public space. And we should not take the most vulnerable and joyous members of our communities and really subject them to that also.
And what do you say to people that say, well, you should have a spare bottle for the baby for public spaces?
Well, most people know not to say stuff like that to me. But my daughter didn't really drink from a bottle, right? So she was all breastfed, and if people want to have those things, but parenting is stressful enough and you may forget something and you may not even need a spare bottle. So let's say you had a spare bottle, you still need to get the milk into it if you were breastfeeding. So I tell moms, you do what is most practical for you. And in many cases, the most practical thing for families is to not worry about refrigerating something. The body keeps milk at the appropriate temperature, is just to put the baby to breast. And anybody that has a problem with that, that is their problem. And I'm telling people, if you are being harassed, these things need to be reported. And third parties who are bystanding and seeing these things happen, this is an opportunity for you to step up as a bystander and say, this is inappropriate. What you're doing needs to stop, etc. And I've done that, and I see other people doing that, and it brings double heartbeat when I see other Black men standing at that bystander intersection, supporting people that are feeding their children. And sometimes people are feeding more than one child. Some of our families are tandem nursing. Maybe they have multiples. I mean, I have a family in my practice, and they have a 2-year-old and they have an infant, and they're breastfeeding both. And you talk about the normalization. So people are like, okay, well, I can normalize a mom putting an infant to the breast, but we've also got to normalize that the international standard for breastfeeding is at least 2 years. Like at 2 years.
Not
and
6
then,
months anymore. 2 years, not 6 months.
And then as long as mother and or child desires, and that's been the international standard, that's not exclusive, but that is continuation. So we've also got to normalize that letting your 2-year-old at the breast and beyond should be as normal as the newborn. So let's keep working together, Black community, to normalize these things. And for everyone that is doing these things and walking boldly towards creating new social paradigms in our communities, you are heroes.
No, I love that, because it used to be 6 months. I nursed my daughter Cecily until she was 18 months. And I was encouraged by family members not to, because she was walking around saying the nickname for her milk and reaching for it like in public, and so I thought it was funny, but they did not. But she did nurse until she was 18 months old. So
good for you.
Years is, I think that's a good time, and it's so good for them. Now, I love your philosophy too of you do you, whatever works best for you, because that's our philosophy here too. Like, we give you the information, you do what you want with it. You're the parent, we just tell you what the best practices are. But let's go into a little bit about like hospitals. What are they doing now to encourage nursing in our community, or are they?
So I would say, so one, there are multiple options to give birth outside of hospitals now, and there is an amazing movement of Black birthing centers that are being recreated. It's amazing things, or birthing centers that are in Black communities that are offering an alternative to hospital birth for those that are low risk. I do believe that when you are seeking out where you are going to give birth, these are opportunities to ask. How does your hospital support breastfeeding? Do they have skilled lactation care? More importantly, what services are you going to offer to be able to support me when I leave the hospital? Do you have virtual options for follow-up lactation care? I think people deserve, within reason, because I recognize if you live in the Northern Mariana Islands, one of our U.S. territories, there's one hospital there. But if you live on the mainland and you live where there are multiple different options, you should ask these questions in deciding where you want to give birth. And if you live where there's not options, you should be advocating and letting that health facility know that these are important things that, you know, your patients need. So that's where I would start those conversations. But having your family and your support system educated about the basics of breastfeeding before you go to the hospital, knowing that exclusive breastfeeding is normal, should be cultivated, should be protected, that you shouldn't give any supplements unless absolutely necessary after exhausting everything else. Having people around you that can advocate and stand in solidarity with you are really important, even if you need to call them on FaceTime. And that's why I recommend when you're having a baby shower, take that time to everyone that's around you and make sure you invite people of the opposite sex or people of the dominant sex in your community, people that are influential elders, etc., and have 10 to 15 minutes at that session to really just get everybody on the same page about breastfeeding. I go to baby showers and I do this type of teaching. And then when you get to a hospital, if everybody in your support system knows the importance of breastfeeding, knows the importance of not supplementing with infant formula, unless absolutely necessary, that's going to make a difference in you being able to advocate and really make informed choices, because the people around you are supporting what that community has come to consensus around, which is normal, safe, and sustainable.
Do you advocate for every woman who gives birth to have a lactation specialist or support, or is it just when you have issues?
I advocate for every person in every situation in life to have support. I think support can look like different things at different times, but I see no issue if you would like to have skilled lactation come in, and if nothing else, just to give you a thumbs up that everything is going the way that it should, you should feel no way inhibited. Oftentimes what I see in my community-based practice is that people did not ask for help, and they asked for help, you know, a week later or so forth. It's important to get your latch, your position, the things that are going to help to create an adequate supply. They start right after birth. It's your things like your skin to skin, letting baby find the breast, etc. If you are unsure and you want someone to give you a thumbs up, or you just want people to walk you through these things, maybe do some education, I say absolutely. Ask for support, and ask for support as much as and as often as you need, which is why you need to ask, do you have virtual lactation support? I refer people to the breastfeeding hotline and so forth. But absolutely, don't wait. Don't wait for your car to break all the way down before you go to the mechanic, right? If you think something is not right, look, there's a light on that's not working. I need to know if this is normal before I keep driving.
Good advice. Good advice. Now, for parents listening right now who may be struggling or unsure where to turn, what advice would you give them?
I would say reach out within your community, whether it's through your WIC office, through your healthcare organization, through a variety of, there are some amazing social media groups for Black parents, some of which I'm in, where there are lactation professionals that can point you towards help, either virtually or help in your community. Look for things like chocolate milk cafes, where there are breastfeeding support groups, breastfeeding, chest feeding, human lactation support groups, because they are inclusive to all identities, to see if they exist in your area. And in many communities, they do. Think of things like Cocoa Beans, that's down in the metropolitan Charlotte area. The Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere, that's down in the Atlanta area. There's things in DC, Philadelphia. There's things in rural communities. There's La Leche League, etc. If you ever are in a pinch and you don't know where to go for help, this is where you start reaching out to things like Black Mamas Breastfeed. You reach out to places like Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere. And those organizations will help bridge the gap and find care in your area or attach you to virtual care to get your needs met. And I'm going to tell you, these Black colleagues, my sisters, brothers, my siblings that are in this space, they are so committed to you being successful. They are going to be there for you and center your goals and your experiences, bringing applause to you in every way. It's just going to be transformational.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Now, finally, how can our audience connect with you and learn more about your work via social media or the internet?
Well, you can Google my name and you can find me in some places right there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I talk to a lot of people on LinkedIn. I do see patients in my community. I live in a rural community and I see patients here in South Central Pennsylvania, but I know how to find connections. And, you know, there's opportunities to partner. There needs to be more mainstream media highlighting Black families that are breastfeeding, highlighting non-traditional Black families in their breastfeeding journey. So I would love to connect with people that would like to share their journeys and figure out how we can get some platforms to empower other people who may be in the same situation, and your experience might be just the push that they need to step forward. I think the last thing that I would say is you can reach me if you are particularly interested in becoming a lactation specialist, becoming an international board certified lactation consultant, or want to brainstorm around ways that you can institutionalize lactation care in your community. I'm an open book and happy to help co-create some solutions there with you.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Keenan, for joining us today. You have given us a plethora of information about lactation, and I absolutely love your energy. I love what you're doing, so please keep it up.
Thank you for having me, and until we meet again, keep breastfeeding, chest feeding, keep lactating, supporting the next generation of Black excellence, because it starts with breastfeeding and human milk.
Fantastic. And a big shout out to all of you tuning in and engaging with us here at BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the syndicated podcast that's a must for Black parents everywhere. And be sure to follow us on social media. Click on everything, our follows, our likes, our ads. And don't forget to share blackparenting.com with a friend. It's your go-to place to get masterclasses by experts in Black parenting. Go to blackparentingacademy.com. Until next time, I wish you all the best and much success. Take care. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine. We'll see you soon.